days of the former as a bit of a light entertainment, so I thought we'd just get together and sing some songs about war and death. As Catherine mentioned, I was sent to Afghanistan. In 2009, in July that year, I rocked up in Uruzgan province, and I'm a musician, I don't just go places, I rock up. And I rocked up in Uruzgan and quickly discovered three things about the place. The first was that it was incredibly dusty. There was this fine bloody dust that just got everywhere. And the second thing I discovered after attending the RSO and I course, the Reception, Staging, No One's Integration course, and being driven by the ADF under the MNBDK, the multinational based terror card, I very quickly came to the conclusion that MEO, the Middle Eastern Area of Operations, had turned into an ARE, an acronym-rich environment. Seriously, there are TLAs coming out of everyone's ARCs. Had a bunch of guys there from 1RAR, the Royal Australian Regiment, working within the MRTF, the Mentoring and Reconstruction Task Force, living on FOBs, forward operating bases, COPS, combat outposts, observing SOPs, standard operating procedures, TTPs, tactics, training and procedures, avoiding where possible AP mines, anti-personnel mines, IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And then within the IED category, you had PP IEDs, pressure plate initiated IEDs, VB IEDs, vehicle-borne IEDs, DB IEDs, donkey-borne IEDs. The Taliban, it turned out, were very innovative in the use of these improvised bombs, including daisy chain arrangements where one bomb would be connected to another by detonation cord. And that was the other thing I discovered, this combination of the dust and the IEDs was deadly. On my first day there, I attended a memorial service for a young soldier named Ben Renato, who'd been killed in an IED strike on the morning of the 18th of July in 2009. And as I got working in the MRTF headquarters, I got to know a few people in what they call the two shop. The two shop is the intelligence cell. And I found out what happened to Ben that morning, and eventually read the inquiry report into his death, which got me imagining a conversation between the colonel who wrote that report and one of Ben's mates, a fellow soldier named Paul Warren. And I wrote this next song from Paul's point of view. It's called The Dust of Uruzgan. In the ring they call me Warlord, my mother calls me Paul. You can call me Private Warren when you're filing your report. As to how I came to be here, this is what I understand. In this hospital in Germany from the Dust of Uruzgan. Well, I had just turned 28 and just bought a new car when I joined the 1st Battalion of the Big 1RAR. And we were next up for deployment into South Afghanistan to combat the insurgents in the Dust of Uruzgan. Well, it took 7 months of training just to get into the joint. There were push-ups and procedures, and there was death by PowerPoint. And then the RSO and I course in Ali al-Salam. But nothing can prepare you for the Dust of Uruzgan. And me and Benny sat together, flying into Kandahar, and we sucked back on our near beers in the Camp Baker bar. We were up at 05:30 and on the Herkin out. In 20 flying minutes we were into Taran Kout. And we shook hands as the boys ripped out from MRTF1. And pretty soon we're out patrolling in the Afghan summer sun, walking through the green zones with a Steyr in my hand, body armour chafing through the Dust of Uruzgan. Well, we started up near Chora, working 14 hours a day, mentoring a Kandak from the Afghan 4th Brigade, down through the Baluchi into eastern Dorshan, working under open skies in the Dust of Uruzgan. Well, it's a long, long way from Townsville, not like any place you've seen. Suddenly you're walking through the 14th century. Women under burqas and tribal warlords rule a land full of goats and muck and jingle trucks is the Dust of Uruzgan. And the education minister can neither read nor write, And the Minister for Women runs a knock shop there at night. They've been fighting there forever over water, food and land, murdering each other in the Dust of Uruzgan. Yeah, there's nothing about the province that's remotely fair or just, but worse than the corruption is the endless fucking dust. Fine as talcum powder on the ground and in the air. And it gets into your eyes, and it gets into your hair, and it gets into your weapon, and it gets into your boots. And when the bureaucrats all show up there, it gets into their suits. It gets in the machinery and foils every plan. There's something quite symbolic about the Dust of Uruzgan. Still the people can be gracious, and they're courteous and smart. And when the children look into your eyes, they walk into your heart. Face each day with courage, and each year without a plan, beyond scratching for survival in the Dust of Uruzgan. But the Taliban are ruthless. They keep the people terrorised with roadside bombs and hangings and leaving letters in the night. And they have no useful vision for the children of this land, but to keep them praying on their knees in the Dust of Uruzgan. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the two shop made a call on a compound of interest to the east of Cial. We had some information that they were building IEDs, so we cordoned and we searched it in accord with SOPs. Well, I was on the west flank picket, propped there with Ben, there to keep a watchful eye out while the other blokes went in. We knew the signs of danger from the TTPs we'd learned, but the Nationals were moving back and forth without concern. I'd been static there for hours when I shifted slightly back. My foot tripped an AP mine and everything went black. I woke up on the gurney, flat out on my back. I had to ask them 7 times just to get the facts that I lived to tell this story through a simple twist of fate. The main charge lay 10 feet away from the pressure plate. You see, the mine was linked by det cord to a big charge laid by hand, hidden under Benny by the Dust of Uruzgan. I was a Queensland champ Thai boxer, now I look south of my knee, and all I see is bed sheets where my right foot used to be. Benny's dead and buried underneath Australian sand, but his spirit's out there wandering through the dust. The Dust of Uruzgan. My birth, and some go back to Ballarat and some go back to Perth. I've been living with my mother who's still trying to understand why we're spending blood and treasure in the dust of Uruzgan. There was a song called Dust of Uruzgan from an album of mine called Dust of Uruzgan. A couple of years ago, I turned it into a theatre show called Dust of Uruzgan. And last week, I released a book called The Dust of Uruzgan. The astute among you will have picked up a pattern here. It was a dusty place, and you may also surmise that I've got a bit carried away with it when it comes to telling this story. It is a story I'm quite passionate about telling. It's a fascinating one, but also I think an important one. 20,000 young Australians have served in Afghanistan in the last 15 years. We don't need to lionise those soldiers. We don't need to pity them, but we do need to understand their experiences so that they don't walk the land as strangers in the way that a generation of Vietnam veterans did. And I think there are aspects of this story that haven't been well explained in the Australian media. For example, when I showed up in Afghanistan, what I noticed was there's quite a lot of Afghans there. I spoke to them as a diplomat, and in this book I've told their aspect of it, their side of the story, the bit of their history, so you understand the way the Afghans saw us. But there's other dimensions of the story that I don't think have been well explained. How we came to be in this obscure little province of Uruzgan, what we were trying to achieve there, and what the challenges were, the heat, the dust, the Taliban, their rockets, their IEDs, their snipers, toxic snake pit tribal politics, and then there was the Dutch. We worked over there for 4 years with the Dutch, and generally speaking, Australian soldiers got on pretty well with the Dutch soldiers, but there were a couple of cultural issues that really caused heartache for the diggers. One was the fierce proclivity of the Dutchmen for wearing lycra. You couldn't stop them, it was unforgivable. The second was a Dutch cultural practice known as swaffelen. I don't know if you've heard of swaffelen. I'd never heard of it before I went over there, but when I arrived, one of the Aussie diggers came up to me and said, "Hey Fred, you've got to do something about those Dutchies. They keep swaffling in the Dixies." I said, "No worries, I'll get right onto it." I didn't know what it meant. And so I asked one of my diplomatic counterparts from Holland, a fellow called Alex Oostwijk, I said, "Alex, what's this swaffling business, mate?" He said, "Oh, it's a Dutch cultural practice." I said, "Yeah, what does it mean?" He said, "Oh, it just means to swing your penis backwards and forwards and bump it up against something." I said, "Is this common in Holland?" He said, "Oh yes, more so amongst the men than the women." I said, "How did it become so popular?" He said, "It became very popular through YouTube. You see 2 Dutch tourists film one another swaffling the Taj Mahal." Look it up. The footage of this went onto YouTube, went viral, and started a whole craze of Dutch tourists travelling around the world swaffling national monuments like the Sphinx and the Eiffel Tower. And this got me very worried because we were spending a lot of money here in Australia on counter-terrorism, but what were we doing to counter the swaffling threat? So I sent a cable back to the main office in Canberra recommending a series of countermeasures, including biometric testing at the border for Dutch tourists and passing electric current through the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The cable was not well received. But we had a more immediate problem on the base insofar as the Dutch soldiers were swaffling in the Dixies. And the Dixies are the blue plastic portaloos that proliferated around the base. And of course these were the dunnies, and as such they were sacred space to the Australian soldier. This is where your Aussie soldier writes his poetry. The future of Australian war poetry was at stake. I had to do something about it. So I wrote the following song called Neat Swafflin' Op the Dixie. It's Dutch for don't swing your dick in the portaloo. Sing along. Well, I've heard that when the Taliban held power in Kabul, they messed up people's lives with lots of silly rules. Women were illegal, and so was flying kites. And God defend the kind of men who like to dress in tights. I wouldn't want to be like the Taliban and tell you what to do. I'm fighting here for freedom after all, just like you. I respect your lowlands culture, and I love you very much. But there is one important thing I say to all you Dutch. 2, 3, 4, knit, swapping up the Dixie. There isn't enough room. If I hear that you've been swaffling in that Dixie, I'll tell Brigadier Van Oom, and he'll have you court-martialed and sent back to The Hague, where they'll put your dick on a table and whack it with a spade. So knit, swaffling up the Dixie. Knit, 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 swaffling up the Dixie. It really isn't fair. There are people who need to use that Dixie, and you could swaffle anywhere. You could swaffle in Paris, you could swaffle in Rome, you could swaffle in the Taj Mahal, or wait till you get home. You could swaffle in the shower block with shampoo or soap. You could swaffle with the RSM or with the fucking Pope. But nip, swaffling up the Dixie. Nip, 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 swaffling up the Dixie. It really is quite gross. Once a week they clean those Dixies with a great big vacuum hose. And if you're swaffling in that Dixie on a lazy Saturday, you may find yourself fellatioed in the most unpleasant way. It'll grab you, it'll suck you till there is nothing left. What's the BDA, that's the battle damage assessment, gonna say about your cause of death? There you died, swaffling in the Dixie. Nit, nit, nit. Sing along now. Nit, 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 nit. Sing along now. Nit, 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 nit. Swappling up the Dixie. Nit, nit, nit. Anyway, this song, Nit Swaffling Up the Dixie, has proved very popular with school children in the south of Canberra. If you'd like to get a copy of it for your kiddies, it's on a CD of mine called Dust of Uruzgan, which is on sale out there for $25, and the kiddies love it. All my songs about war and death are on it. They love that stuff. Of course, that's $25. Then there's my book, The Dust of Uruzgan. You can buy it for $33. Now, tomorrow is Father's Day. You can get the CD and the book for $50 and make your dad very happy. Anyway, I digress into marketing. But I should finish the story about the Dutch. They withdrew from Uruzgan province in the summer of 2010, and some people think this happened as a result of the collapse of the political coalition in The Hague, but in fact it was my prohibition on Dixie swaffling that broke the will of the Dutch military, and they pulled out that summer. It was a very tough summer. 1,000 of them came in to get the other 2,000 out, then 1,000 Americans came in to replace them. Base was full, the lines in the mess were long, the Dixies were chocker. And to make matters worse, the Dutch lost the World Cup soccer final. This is the summer of 2010, and they were downhearted about that. So I put on a concert on the 17th of July that year just to cheer them up, and I wrote this last verse just to thank them for their contribution to Uruzgan province. Well, Dutch friends, I've heard you're leaving. I know you've made this plan because swaffling has become illegal here in Uruzgan. But when you're back in Holland, you can swaffle what you like. You can swaffle in a windmill. You can swaffle in a dike. You can swaffle in a hash pipe. In Leiden or Geleen, but you can't swaffle the World Cup because the fucking thing's in Spain. So swaffling up the Dixie. Sing along now. Nit, nit, nit.